Welcome to the market recap presented by Tackle Trading. Get in the game.
Good afternoon, Tackle Traders, and hello, YouTube. This is Frank coming to you with the market recap for the 10th of October. Wednesday. That was an interesting day, wasn't it? A ton of selling in the market today as it started down, and it just kept picking up more and more steam as the day progressed. Just to illustrate how much selling there was, this is just the top loser page on the S&P 500 for the day. We are 20 stocks in, and 19 of them lost at least 7%. If you go to the next several pages, you'll find lots of things that lost 5 and 4%. It was a rough day for the bulls, that is for sure, as we saw all sorts of stuff break in the market. So let's get right down into it. Long story short, if you don't have a lot of time today, everything but utilities tanked. So, if you only have 30 seconds, that's where we find ourselves, getting a little bit deeper. Of course, we gapped down on the open on the S&P market as a whole. Below that 50-day moving average, the selling started. And again, it just kept going. The bears finally, the bulls had been fighting the last few days, somewhat valiantly on the, as the day progressed, more would come in. Today, that was not the case. Huge selling, down over 3% on the S&P, down over 4 on the NASDAQ, 3 on the Dow, and almost 3 on the Russell. So that tells you it was a very bearish day. We're approaching that 200-day moving average, which I think, just realistically speaking, is what we're kind of looking at right now in the market, in the S&P in particular. Hard to want to I would never buy anything that looked like this tomorrow or anything like that. But that 200s we know can, although it doesn't always, and the Russell did give up today. But that is an average that traders do look towards. So I think we can kind of monitor that as we move into the next couple of days, although I don't know how keen I'd be on buying a bounce. I will certainly respect it. Same with the NASDAQ, really. We closed right above that 200 here today. Again, we closed at the bottom. Unlike the last several trading days, where we found that intraday low and rallied up to close the day. Not the case today. We closed at the bottom pretty much on most things that you're going to look at. We are still above that. That obviously will be something that we can monitor. I would definitely like to see a bounce there, because whether you're on the bullish side, obviously want to see a bounce there. But even from a bear, if you're not in a bearish position on the NASDAQ or in general right now, it's not that you can't get in tomorrow. It's that these things are so extended, it becomes difficult, to find things that meet at least my trading criteria. Definitely want to see some sort of upward movement. And then I'm open to, bearish retracement, bearish breakdowns, or even some potential bounces if my trends remained intact in certain sectors. They were not quite taken out just yet. But above the 200 for the time being, we'll see if that lasts over on the NASDAQ. We did put up a small fight on the 50 over on the Dow Jones today before completely throwing the towel in there as well. More and more and more selling. Again, I think we can kind of start to watch these averages, but really you have to be careful right now. That's for sure. Russell, of course, had really been fighting on its 200 the last several days, gave up today, not only broke that, but I want to go to a weekly chart on the Russell just to illustrate how kind of nasty this one is. We broke a major breakout point. Looking at the weekly chart, this was a major breakout point earlier in the year, and we fell through it like it was intraday support. And so very bearish charts over there. Again, we're very extended to the downside. That's one thing we want to be mindful of on these types of situations. But certainly we're seeing a ton of bearish signals everywhere we look in the overall market. Over in the material sector, yesterday we had closed right at that major support level, and today took it out in pretty dramatic fashion. Very, very bearish. We were bearish before this over on the material sector. We still are very bearish after the way that price developed here today. Energy, which had been hanging around at resistance pretty steadily over the last week or so, finally threw in the towel, sold off. The one positive I will say about energy, and that will be an area that I am open to from a bullish point of view is we pulled back to the breakdown point, and that's kind of where we caught our breakout point, and that's where we caught our footing. That is a positive technical development in a day where there's not a lot of positive bullish technical developments. I will take what I can get. So that's stopping there at that price point where it should. I mean, that makes sense. Price-wise, I think it's in a great position. Now, how we got there, can't love that, right? So definitely want to see some sort of, develop, price appreciation, some upward movement, stuff like that before I'd be open to it. But, unlike materials, which, if it goes up, it's going up without me. That chart is too bearish, regardless of what today was like. I don't think the energy sector looks terrible. It just, I'm not going to be jumping up and down to buy things tomorrow morning after a day like today. But I do like where we are from a price point of view. Over in the financials, really, really rough looking chart, very bearish chart in my opinion, obviously a bearish day, but that pretty much goes without saying. But we really spent the last week kind of consolidating in that moving average soup. You can kind of see we were just hanging around that 250 and 20 really over the last trading week. We, of course, saw the downward movement today, took out support. There's not a ton of support in the financial sector for a ways to go. Now, the one caveat there is we do have earnings coming up later this week and early next week on a lot of these financial companies that can change the story. If they have great earnings, that can get this back on track, of course. That's information we'll have to wait and see. Of course, I wish I knew what their earnings were going to be. But really, just from a technical point of view, we've failed at support. I think you could argue that this is a little bit of a reverse head and shoulders pattern. I know you'll have to forgive me, not a straight line, but here's our left shoulder, here's our head, and here's our break of our right shoulder here today. Not a lot of support for another, 80, 90 cents. A little bit of space in between where we are and there. Very bearish looking chart to me. We'll have to see how those earnings, if those earnings can change anybody's mind. Industrials, after closing just a little bit below support yesterday, but above its 50-day moving average, plummeted today, for lack of a better term. Very bearish, breaking through everything. I mean, nothing was holding things up today. If it was very short term. You would look like maybe it found an intraday footing, and then before you know it, that thing was broken. It was, a big slide again. And of course, industrials were really not spared in that regard. So I do want to see some movement back into them before I would be open to anything from a bullish point of view. Again, from a bearish point of view, I mean, that's where the trends are pointing us right now. These things are very extended. So from my personal taste, I really have to, if I'm not already bearish, I almost have to see some upward movement before I can jump in because my risk to reward is just not there with them being so extended to the downside. As we look at tech, very rough day over there. Unlike the NASDAQ that just kind of closed right above its 200, we actually closed a little bit below our 200 over in the tech sector ETF today. Again, that 200, I expect that area to fight, and a little breach is not going to, sway, in my opinion. I've seen that many, many times where it goes just above or below. But these areas are areas that should be very enticing to not just traders, but to investors. I mean, think about this. Just a month ago, we would have loved to see some of these prices, right? I don't think anybody's unhappy to see the prices that we're seeing. I think we're scared because of how fast we got to these prices. A nice deep pullback to the 200-day moving average on the NASDAQ. Well, that's a nice thing, in my opinion, presents some nice opportunities. But when we free fall to it in just a matter of days, that opportunity is not something I trust. Whether it works out, I should or shouldn't, is really not in the equation. But certainly an interesting location over there. Our staples put up a little bit of a better fight today before really throwing in the towel, along with the rest of the market closing very bearish. This is an area where I can see some potential trading opportunities, bearish trading opportunities developing in the next couple of days, because while there was plenty of selling here today in that sector, we're not really extended to my eyes, at least. This is certainly, we've been talking about this for a little bit now. If we break down, that would be a bearish opportunity. And so this area could be an area that if we do end up seeing that break and continue to see more selling, could be an area where I actually could see some trading opportunities that I would want to take advantage of, as we move into Thursday and Friday. Obviously, we haven't broke that yet, and that is a positive development. You have to give the staple sector some respect today for being one of the few areas that did hold some support. So I'm not going to bet on that happening necessarily, but I do like that as a potential area that's not so extended to the downside if we do in fact break through that support. Utilities continued really to be the place where people were putting their money here today. They did sell off pretty heavily off of their highs today. Of course, market really accelerated in selling as the day went on. Of course, the ETF was testing resistance, so that was just naturally a place where some profit taking was sensible to be had. But certainly, we definitely got some weakness in today's candle in that sector. Overall, though, it's been pretty clear this last little bit that that is where some of this money is going. That's coming out of these other things, and I think really as the market just continue to sell and sell and sell. I mean, eventually, that happens and nothing really holds up. And I think that's kind of what happened to utilities today. Personally, it was very strong early. As more and more selling pressure developed, it kind of got caught up with the wave. Watch that resistance area. I wouldn't be terribly surprised if we do see some pullback, especially if we continue to sell into tomorrow. It was very extended to the upside to begin with, coming off of resistance, seeing a lot of selling on the intraday closing, it down there at the bottom. So a very bearish looking candle independently, but overall still remains a pretty strong area in my opinion as folks look for those defensive areas to put some money right now. As we look at healthcare, I still am open to healthcare too. It did briefly close below the 50, and it would be important to me before any potential bullish opportunities develop to see upward movement. Of course, that's always true. I'd definitely like to see that get on the right side of the 50. Again, maybe it pulls back further and we're changing our, what we're looking for in a few days. But as of this moment, I'd be open to it. I don't think we've taken out trend. We certainly have, sold off a lot today. And a lot of these healthcare companies really did, drop quite a bit, like many things in the overall market. But I'm not terribly unhappy with where it finds itself. And we knew it needed a pullback anyway. So this is that one area, this and energy. These two areas from a bullish point of view haven't, in my opinion, completely been obliterated from a technical point of view, unless we're buying like 200-day moving average type of bounces. So those are areas that I can be persuaded on from a bullish perspective, just not tomorrow. So nothing's going to persuade me tomorrow. As we look at the discretionary sector, much like the tech, we've worked our way back down just to approximately our 200-day moving average. Had already shown a lot of relative weakness in that department, having broken down last week through support. Again, very extended to the downside. Common theme here today at a major point, major moving average in the form of the 200. So let's see how we can respond to that, especially those rising 200s. Now in real estate, we have that flat 200, which just kind of illustrates a long-term overall sideways trend. And we did break below that today, but that we've talked about before. When we're sideways, I expect less of the moving averages. Personally, that's how I use them. I think they're most useful when we're trending one way or another. If we're sideways, I think they're just pretty colors to look at that can cause short-term interruptions, but they don't really ever scare me off too much. We still remain pretty bearish over there. Of course, yesterday and the day before, we had a little bit of a rally. We were already very bearish before all the market really started to sell off. Definitely saw a triggering type of candle here today, of course, very extended already. But I still think we have a pretty clear point, at least I do, at this very moment, I can't be bullish on real estate until we break that high, which now is yesterday's high. Now that I've seen that downward movement, I can say, not that I expect this, but I can say if this does end up breaking, now it's yesterday's high, not necessarily tomorrow, but eventually, then I can break resistance. That is a buy signal. Whether I'd buy or not, we'll have to wait and see. Obviously, I'm not expecting that to happen. I don't ever expect that to happen. I always bet on support and resistance because it's always the smart money play. Doesn't always work, but it's always the probability play. Pretty bearish though overall within this sector. Really, don't think you can make any strong case for it. the communications services sector just annihilated today. As you saw Netflix just go down, you saw Facebook drop significantly. I mean, this has been an area that's been a little bit rocky anyway the last week or so. Very bearish over there in the communication services sector. So, I mean, as we can see, I mean, there was a ton of selling. And when you have days like this, I mean, most of these charts to one extent or another look pretty similar. So the things that are really, looking different are the things that are going to interest me. Utilities, not necessarily tomorrow, but their strength, it interests me. The longer term trend of the healthcare sector, that still interests me. The holding of the breakout point on the energy sector. When everything's looking the same, it's probably going to behave very similar, right? So I'm going to be looking for things from the bullish side that can be, have strong independent potential. Of course, like I said, I don't see anything from a bullish point of view. I don't see any great bullish entry points as of tomorrow. That would be a Friday at best type of situation for my trading rules, at least. Now, interestingly enough, as crazy and as much selling as we saw in the overall market, in the commodities market, it was kind of not nearly all that exciting. Gold, on days like this, gold used to, really, pop. But today, it inched its way up, but it didn't do anything. It continues to stay within the same trading range. Really, that wasn't looked as a safe haven today, right? That's for sure. We continue to be very sideways. Silver actually dipped a little bit. I think it's still pretty much hanging around that breakout point that we've been talking about. We saw it, stop there a couple of days ago, doji there yesterday. It's kind of where it found its footing here today. I don't think we've really changed technically over in silver from that perspective, but definitely nobody was interested in silver today amidst all the selling. The dollar really pretty flat, didn't move dramatically, over in the dollar index down 0.17, so really nothing. Didn't really make any significant moves over in the dollar. I think we're kind of right there on the edge. I'll extend this line out a little bit now. We've been above that breakout point for long enough to do so. I think we're still kind of right on the edge of holding that breakout. I know that number, a lot of people were looking at that 95.50 when we were talking about breakouts, 2 weeks ago. And so I do think we still continue to hold that breakout point from a technical point of view over on the dollar, but have not really seen any folks jumping in to take advantage of that situation just yet. We did see a little bit of selling in natural gas, but nothing dramatic, down 1% on the day off of yesterday's high. Another pretty volatile day from top to bottom. There was definitely some movement in the natural gas market today, but we still obviously remain very overall bullish for natural gas. Could be an area if we could see a little pullback opportunity that might be interesting for us because of the overall strength that we've been seeing in that. But again, really not much has changed in natural gas for quite some time, and today is certainly no exception. Over on crude, it kind of pulled back, as you can kind of see, working right back towards that rising 20-day moving average. It hammered a couple of days ago, saw a little bit of upward movement yesterday, never even tried off of yesterday's upward movement, never even tried to continue that here today. Don't really love the signal just yet, but I do and I am interested in still potential bullish opportunities in crude. I do like the placement, as we kind of talked before. It's okay if it, we kind of wanted to see it hold the breakout point, right? Because that's always, for me, that's always the thing I want to look towards first. But I don't think it's a bad thing that breakout point didn't hold and we pulled back a little bit deeper. Clearly have not seen any signs of turnaround after today's candle. I am interested in the general price of the crude right now, but the chart doesn't say that today is the day to be making any moves to me. Again, you can kind of see really no matter what we're looking at, there's really not too many trigger opportunities that are going to be developing, first thing tomorrow morning. Again, if you trade like me, maybe your rules are different, but if you trade like me, tomorrow is going to be a wait and see type of day, maybe some breakdowns over in the stable sector. If we do end up breaking support, I could see that being an area that could trigger as early as tomorrow. But for the most part, broadly speaking, I don't really see a lot of new opportunities really on either side tomorrow. If you're in, you're pretty happy, or you're pretty unhappy, depending if you're bullish or bearish. but I don't really think we're seeing any great opportunities. They're going to be popping up first thing tomorrow morning. It might be one of those days where we just sell off another huge red candle, or we bounce all the way back and then we have to look to the intraday for entries. That's something we can do if we continue to see downward movement. Look to the intraday for potential entry points to the downside. To the upside, yeah, that's not going to work for me unless, I can't really see working for me at all in any areas tomorrow, to be quite honest with you. Not that I'm necessarily right, but I don't think whatever it does tomorrow bullish, it's going to have to do without me, I'm afraid. So that is where we find ourselves. Certainly a lot more selling than we're accustomed to seeing. I think you can safely say that some fear has crept back into the market. Whereas before we were seeing, some at least cautious bulls stepping in day after day on intraday lows and turning things around, at least off of the low point. Today, they didn't really, if they tried, they didn't try very hard, and they got beat up and probably aren't going to be all that keen on trying tomorrow. We have to be, want to make sure we're being careful, not chasing either way. Some of these prices, I'll be honest, some of them are appealing to me that I'm seeing on some various stocks, but I can't jump in just because the price is low, right? Or relatively low to where it was, a week ago or whatever. Some of these things are looking very bearish to me, but I'm not going to chase if the risk reward isn't there. If they're already too extended to the downside, I'm just going to congratulate everybody who took advantage of them and wish them all the best. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, as crazy as it was, it was just another day in the market, and we'll see these things. This is why rules, money management, these things are so important. We've seen some weakness in the Russell. We've seen it in the NASDAQ. We really hadn't broke support, cleanly, in my opinion, at least on the Dow or the S&P until today. So, but of course, that is no longer the case. But this is why we have those position sizing rules. This is why we think about delta weighting our portfolio, so we're not all on the bull side or all on the bear side. I do keep in mind, from a hedging point of view, you can always look to do that. If you're looking to hedge your portfolios, you can always add some bearish delta or something like that if you feel like you need to, not necessarily this very moment in time, but just as a general rule. But you want to be careful, on markets like this because they move fast. And there's nothing. I was talking with producer Cam before we went live today, and I told him, for me, these are kind of boring. As funny as it is, these are kind of boring nights from a trading point of view, because whenever I see something dramatic, I'm almost always doing nothing the next day. Even though the day was exciting, maybe, to look at, I'm not really very exciting tomorrow. I'm probably doing nothing that's not already done. And so, days like this, I want to be sold. I don't feel like I need to chase. I don't, I like a lot of people in the market. Is this the bottom? Is this the start of a huge downward trend? I don't know. If I knew that answer, I'd be happy to tell everybody that, of course. Until I start to get more signals, obviously, I'm going to be very cautious. I'm going to be patient. There will be great opportunities, whether it's we get a bounce, early next week and get some great bearish retracements, or we start to see things, break to the upside again. That opportunity will present itself. I don't feel like any trader needs to jump in tomorrow. Now, if you see great opportunities that reach your trading goals and your trading rules, of course, you'll always have my blessing to do that as long as you're following the rules of your system. I'm always comfortable with that. But don't feel like I have to have an opinion tomorrow. My opinion is I'm going to be a giant wimp tomorrow, and I'm going to let the market tell me what I should be doing. And, it's going to be probably a pretty laid back next couple of days, other than managing existing trades, for me at least. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, that will do it for the market recap today. But as always, it is certainly my pleasure, and I do appreciate all of your time. Be sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel if you haven't already, so you can be alerted to any new videos that we're doing. And be sure to follow us over at Tackle Trading on Twitter to keep up with some of the things that we're doing and following during the market hours. If you enjoyed the market recap, it is always helpful and appreciated if you give it a thumbs up to let us know that we are on the right track over here. Like I said, make sure you're following your rules. Don't feel like you have to chase. Don't feel like you have to make any, huge commitments for tomorrow, right? If you're not comfortable with the setups you're seeing, that's okay. You're not alone. A lot of people are going to feel that way. So get out of here. Happy trading, and I will see you all in the next one.